This is the story of a princess who lost everything, her crown, her brothers, even her name, and still became the woman who ended one of England's bloodiest wars. This is a fairy tale woven from history, retelling the life of Elizabeth of York through the lens of Cinderella. In the closing years of the 15th century, England stood amid the long afterburn of civil war. The Wars of the Roses had torn the kingdom open. Two houses, Lancaster and York, red rose and white, blood and claim, became indistinguishable. It was into this uneasy peace that Elizabeth was born. Her father, Edward IV, was the first Yorkist king, a man who seized the throne with strength where others had faltered, who married Elizabeth Woodville for love when kings were expected to bargain, and who ruled with a confidence England had not felt in years. Elizabeth was their first child, the first living proof that the House of York had not merely conquered, but begun again. The child who anchored a new reign, the daughter who stood closest to the crown. She was raised in a court bright with certainty. Gold caught the light. Music filled the halls. The white rose bloomed not as a promise, but as a fact. For a time, it seemed the war was finished. But peace, like fire, banked too quickly, can hide embers beneath the ash. Elizabeth was 17 when her father died. One day, Edward IV ruled England with confidence and command. Man and kingdom alike were unprepared. For Elizabeth, this loss was simple and human. She had been her father's daughter, favored, indulged, openly adored. He delighted in her quick mind and careful grace. His death struck her as the loss of a protector, of laughter, of the voice that had spoken her name without calculation. She did not yet understand that she had lost far more than a father. She had lost the ground beneath her. Within days, the court shifted. The crown passed to her brother, still a boy, too young to rule, too young to defend the family his father had built around him. Power rushed to fill the silence Edward left behind. Councils gathered, old loyalties wavered. Men who had waited years for their moment began to move. Elizabeth's mother saw it immediately. She knew what followed the death of a strong king. She gathered her children, she called upon her family, and when it became clear that protection could not be guaranteed, she fled with them to sanctuary. At first, Elizabeth did not understand why. Her brother was king. Her uncle, her father's brother, had sworn to protect him. The banners in the street still bore her family's rose. She had been in sanctuary once before, as a child, when danger came from outside. But this was different. This time the crown rested on her brother's head. Surely this fear was unnecessary. Surely this would pass. Sanctuary closed its doors behind them. Councils met. Questions were raised about marriage, about legitimacy, about whether Edward IV's children had ever truly been heirs at all. Then came the declaration. The marriage of Elizabeth's parents, they said, had never been lawful. The children born of it, never legitimate. In a single pronouncement, the king's sons and daughters were unmade. Elizabeth, who had been raised a princess, was named a bastard, a girl without claim, a future quietly erased. Soon after, her uncle was crowned king. Richard III took the throne. The world Elizabeth had known ceased to exist. Her brothers, Edward V, the young king, and Richard, still a young child, were removed from public sight. They were said to be safe, guarded, protected, but days passed, then weeks. No voices reached sanctuary. No letters arrived. No bodies returned. Only absence. They would come to be called the princes in the tower. How does one mourn without an ending? How does one grieve A silence. The questions had no answers, only whispers. Whispers then, and for centuries to come. The House of York had been reduced to daughters who understood the danger of being noticed, who had seen what happened to boys born too close to the crown. In a kingdom where princes could disappear without a trace, obedience was not submission, it was survival. And so Elizabeth waited. Not by the warmth of a hearth, but in the cold ash of uncertainty. Listening for footsteps, knowing that to endure was to live. Elizabeth was summoned and returned to court, not as she had left it, but as someone newly measured. The same towers rose above her, the same halls echoed beneath her steps. Her father's banners still hung from stone walls that remembered her childhood laughter. But she moved through them quietly now, no longer greeted as the king's daughter, expected to wait, expected to yield. Richard III sat upon the throne her father had won. Queen Anne presided beside him, correct, composed, distant. Elizabeth understood what had changed, not the court, not the walls, but how she was seen. Time did not soften her circumstances, it sharpened them. Power moved quietly now, through letters sealed and resealed, through alliances formed far from the throne, through conversations that ended when she entered a room. In others, they did not bother to stop at all. Stripped of title, declared a bastard, she was still bound to the blood that had shaped England's fate. Dismissed, yet not forgotten. Others began to remember that. Not openly, not safely. The crown her uncle wore sat uneasily, and beyond England's shores, a claim long dismissed began to gather weight. Elizabeth did not hear the moment her fate was first spoken aloud. The words passed instead between her mother, still watchful, still calculating, and another woman who understood power as patience. Margaret Beaufort had spent her life surviving what should have destroyed her. She had borne a son too young, lost a husband too soon, and learned through faith and discipline that the world could be bent if one understood where to press. She did not look at Elizabeth and see a girl in ashes. She saw resolution. Together, the two mothers, named what the court would not openly say, that England could not endure another war, and that the crown could not rest securely without the blood of York beside it. And so a promise was made. If Henry Tudor returned to England, if he claimed the crown, he would marry Elizabeth of York. It was not romance. It was necessity. It was restoration. Richard understood the danger immediately. Elizabeth was no longer merely inconvenient. She was unresolved. As long as she remained unmarried, her future unsettled, the crown could not rest easily. Her presence invited questions that could not be silenced by law alone. And so Elizabeth was drawn back into the light, not to be honored, but to be watched. And she felt it then, not fear, but pressure. She did not yet know what shape her fate would take, only that it was being shaped without her voice. There were nights when Elizabeth wondered whether this was how her story would end, with a marriage chosen for her, not by her mother, but carefully, deliberately, to empty her of consequence. She had seen how power silenced women without ever raising its voice. A bastard could be married downward, a claim could be buried beneath ceremony. A daughter of kings could be folded quietly into someone else's household and disappear. Richard did not need to destroy her, he only needed to place her. It was in such a moment that Margaret Beaufort spoke to her. She did not offer comfort, she did not promise rescue. She did not speak of hope as though it were fragile. Margaret Beaufort had learned long ago that survival was not a miracle, but a discipline, and watched men mistake endurance for weakness. She knew what power truly feared. The crown does not fear men who arrive with armies, Margaret said. It fears the woman who makes them legitimate. Her son, Henry Tudor, was of Lancaster. His claim rested on blood, weakened by distance and exile. Without Elizabeth of York beside him, Victory would remain conquest, nothing more. Elizabeth understood, at last, that her danger was also her strength. Richard could not erase her without proving why she mattered. No spell was cast, no promise of happiness was made, only recognition. News no longer traveled as rumor, it arrived as certainty. A landing, a march, a challenge, no longer whispered. Richard's hold on the crown had never been easy. It had been sustained by silence, by fear, by the belief that time itself would protect him. But time does not guard false things forever. The Battle of Bosworth Field came like the striking of an hour long delayed. Richard III fell, and with him, the spell that had held England suspended. Midnight had come. The crown passed, not by inheritance, but by conquest. Henry Tudor entered London not as a prince, but as a victor. Elizabeth did not rush forward. She did not claim space. She did not need to. Unlike Henry, she had nothing to prove. Her right had existed before the battle, before the march, before the crown changed hands. She had been waiting while others fought, and now the world, rearranging itself once more, could no longer move without her. What conquest had begun, marriage would complete. Henry Tudor married Elizabeth of York. The union was deliberate, public, unmistakable. It was not born of illusion, but of understanding. Elizabeth did not marry to gain power. She brought her power with her. Her blood carried the inheritance denied to her brothers, the claim silenced by law and fear, the lineage England had circled for years without daring to name. With Elizabeth beside him, Henry's crown ceased to be provisional. The long war did not end because one man prevailed, but because one woman made the crown whole. And at last, Elizabeth stepped fully into the light, not transformed, but revealed. On the day of her coronation, Elizabeth of York did not enter as a question. She entered as an answer long delayed. The court gathered in splendor, cloth of gold, vaulted stone, banners lifted once more without fear. Upon her head was placed a crown, adorned with precious stones, rubies and pearls, its stones catching the light as she moved. It was not a gift. The crown fit because it had always been hers. England did not cheer a fantasy fulfilled. It witnessed a truth restored. Elizabeth of York, crowned at last. Not because she had fought for it, but because she had endured. And the kingdom which had torn itself apart over roses and claims found peace. This was not the end of suffering, nor the promise of ease. But the crown, at last, rested where it belonged. Elizabeth of York lived the rest of her life, not in triumph, but in steadiness. Her marriage, born of political necessity, became unexpectedly a partnership of affection and respect. Contemporaries spoke of their closeness, of shared mourning and shared joy, of a king who adored his queen and a queen who steadied his reign. She bore several children, among them was Prince Arthur, long raised and celebrated as the future King of England, the hope upon which the new dynasty rested. Others followed, including a son who would rule as King Henry VIII, and daughters who carried Tudor blood into the courts of Europe. As queen, Elizabeth did not rule loudly. She mediated, interceded, and embodied the reconciliation her marriage had achieved. The white rose of York and the red rose of Lancaster were no longer banners of war, but woven together into the Tudor rose, a symbol of union. Elizabeth died fairly young. She died after childbirth, having given birth to a daughter who lived only a few days. Her absence was felt by her husband, by her children, by a nation that had learned, almost without noticing, to rest upon her. England did not remember her for spectacle, but for what followed her: stability, continuity, a crown that finally stayed in place. This is why her story endured as the first Tudor queen. Because sometimes the fairy tale is not about the transformation before the ball, but about the return and what survives the ashes, about what fits when everything else has failed. And so Cinderella became history, not through rescue. Not a girl lifted from obscurity, but a woman who carried a kingdom until it could stand on its own. If you'd like to explore Elizabeth of York beyond this retelling, I've linked my Effigies of Power episode in the description. In this episode, I reconstruct her funeral effigy using primary sources and reimagine how it once appeared in full royal splendor. If you enjoy storytelling where history, symbolism, and imagination meet, liking, commenting, or subscribing truly help this channel grow. Thank you for watching. Meet the Muse.